Historical figures from centuries ago are only immortalized in paintings and drawings of what they possibly looked like. However, many people are surprised to discover that the invention of the camera happened in the early 1800s. Perhaps one of the biggest missed opportunities in art history was not appreciating Vincent van Gogh while he was still around. This picture was taken when the painter was still young and full of hope for the future. Unfortunately, his multitude of artwork was not really up for exhibition until after his passing at only 37 years old. His sister-in-law inherited his work after her husband, Vincent's brother, passed away months after the artist. Once properly exposed to the people, the notoriety for his talent started to take off. If only it had happened a little earlier. Even his mom underestimated his talent by throwing out boxes of paintings after his death. The name Johnny Appleseed is one that evokes many happy memories of a cartoon man dressed casually as he went spreading seeds across the land. Born in 1774, John Chapman had an obsession. He believed it was important to spread glorious apple trees across the nation. He was welcomed by Native Americans and settlers equally. Johnny Appleseed had a big heart for people and animals, eventually becoming a vegetarian. He was 70 when this photo was taken. The face of the Underground Railroad, Harriet Tubman's main mission in life was to bring freedom to the enslaved people located primarily in the southern United States. Pictured here at age 46, she took the next decade to make 13 trips back down south after having escaped there herself. It takes a different type of bravery to put yourself back in the fire to help get people to safety. What's equally as important as Harriet going back is that she shared information on how to follow the Underground Railroad with others. There is no telling how many can attribute her help to their ability to free themselves. No need to ask Frederick, why so serious? That was a very calculated image that we get a glimpse into with this photograph. After his escape from slavery to the north, Frederick fought to abolish plantations in the south. He was in his early 30s when this photo was taken, just over a decade after he arrived in Maryland to freedom. Another decade or so later, the country was embroiled in war, circling around the abolitionist movement. He lived to see the government free the slaves across the nation. The frontier was known as lawless and chaotic. It's not surprising that wild rumors permeate the legacy of Martha Jane Cannery, better known as Calamity Jane. Most often, when you think of women from this time period, you imagine hoop skirts, corsets, and updos with dainty hats. Calamity Jane was not that image. A capable woman on the frontier, she wore men's clothing and fashioned herself as a sharpshooter. While there is a mix of fact and fiction, she was known to have a softer side towards the sick and in need. She's represented here in her early 30s. The name might not sound familiar, but he definitely lived long enough to leave his mark on history. Let us introduce you to the earliest born person to ever be photographed. Conrad was born in 1749 and actually fought in the Revolutionary War. Some say he was with George Washington as they crossed the Delaware River. In fact, he's the only soldier known to have been photographed from that famous moment. Conrad was 103 in this photograph and lived another 3 years afterward. Born before both the American and French Revolutions, the sixth U.S. president lived long enough to be photographed. Amazing for anyone of the time, but just another notch to his impressive resume. Considering the average life expectancy of the time was 40, it really was a feat to celebrate. John lived to the advanced age of 80, which was only 5 years after this photograph was taken. It was also less than 20 years after he was in charge of the U.S. for 4 years. Funny enough, he looks pretty much the same as the official White House painting in this image. Not only does it show a president enjoying a nice afternoon, but also the incredible talent of the painter from 2 decades earlier. We are so rigorous with our presidential nominees, it's hard to imagine there was a time when no president was actually American at birth. Founder of the Democratic Party, Martin was the first president to be born on American soil. A proponent of states making up their own rules, he didn't feel the need to end slavery or stop the removal of Native Americans from their own land. That might have been why he didn't get re-elected. Medicine Man of the Chiricahua Apaches often seemed more like a warrior or chief. Geronimo got his name from the Mexicans he was fighting against. The reason he was there was to avenge the death of his wife, mother, and some of his children. As he ran towards the Mexicans shooting at him, they shouted out the word Geronimo to warn the others. Afterward, the popular Native American adopted it. Geronimo eventually surrendered 3 times to the American government. During the last time, he led a group of Native Americans down the aisle for President Roosevelt's inauguration. Another president is gracing the list. The 10th leader of the country was 55 when this photo was taken in the last year of his presidency. John had a strange rise to power. He's the first to be president without having been elected. That occurred after the death of President-elect William Harrison, who passed away about a month after taking office. He got fatally sick after not wearing a coat at his inauguration. Speaking of bad luck, John's wife was the first spouse to pass away during the presidency. From sea to shining sea, that is the battle cry of those who held manifest destiny in their hearts. One of those was the 11th president, James Polk. One of the things most people complain about when it comes to politics is that no politician actually keeps their promises. While in office, James annexed Texas, led America through the Mexican-American War, added territory from Mexico that helped fulfill manifest destiny, negotiated the Oregon Treaty, and didn't run for re-election. These were all points he made during his campaign. This photo was taken the year Polk passed away at age 53 from cholera. Seen here with his son in his late 30s, Robert just comes across as a loving father and typical man of his time. He may have been those things at this point in his life, but it wasn't to last. A respected veteran of the Mexican-American War, Robert E. Lee was a successful captain who was eventually promoted to general. When tensions were heating out of control between the North and South, war became inevitable. That's when President Lincoln reached out to Robert in hopes that he would lead the U.S. to victory against the Confederate Army. The general was conflicted by the request of his commander-in-chief and loyalty to his home state of Virginia. Ultimately, he chose to represent the South. When he left his home, he was never able to go back. If you haven't thought much of President Pierce, there's a good reason for that. He was not very popular when he was in office. Here he can be seen during his tenure at age 51. In a time when the country was growing more and more divided, he took the side of stagnation and oppression. Yes, he was for slavery, believing it was beneficial to the economy. Even though there was another president between Franklin and Abraham, he went out of his way to smack-talk Lincoln before and after the latter was elected. After a long struggle with alcoholism, the former man in charge drank himself to death just 4 years after the Civil War ended at age 65.